I'm relatively new to this House, so I'm not sure if it's appropriate to state that I'm a beef farmer. Mr. Carroll, you
actually,
say...
I discussed this with you before. I am too. I don't think it's a conflict of interest for either of us, but inevitably beef farmers have relatively few places to sell their product other than to members of Meat Industry Ireland.
That's it. Mr. Carroll, I was just saying that you say you find it extraordinary, the opinion that Deputy Smith gave, but the clusters and outbreaks in your industry has brought you before this committee today. And before the pandemic, large meat processing plants were most recently associated with protests by farmers. So for me and many others, these two things are intrinsically linked. They speak to how industrial scale meat processing treats people, workers and small suppliers. Farmers receive prices so low they're forced to protest again and again to save their family farms, and workers, especially the more vulnerable ones, are left open to infection. Principles of fairness and equity seem to be lacking. It isn't too much to expect that farmers get a fair price and that workers have safe working conditions. During the week, the German Agriculture Minister pointed out low prices do not fit with sustainability. She linked low prices with meat pressures on animal welfare, working conditions in meat processing plants and farmers' incomes. It's obvious that there are clear parallels to be drawn here. It's large-scale meat plants that are the issue here. It's not migrant workers, it's not farmers, and it's not small abattoirs. They don't seem to be having the same problems. It seems the industrialisation of the sector and the practices has increased the vulnerabilities of a lot of stakeholders. Mr. Carroll, your opening statement provides plenty of context, but it's short on accepting any responsibility. And I'm wondering what responsibility should the owners of Ireland's meat processing plants take for the mass outbreaks amongst their workers? And what are your thoughts on the task force to review your sector? Your opening statement mentions the uncertainty around the exact reasons for the cluster of outbreaks in some meat plants. Also, media report submissions to the committee and statements from workers' representatives raise numerous issues. This is against the backdrop of low prices to farmers, like I said. I'll be seeking a task force to look into the terms and conditions for workers in this sector and to examine state funding. I'm wondering, will you support this? A few more questions after that.
Thank you, Deputy. Again, I'm kind of surprised that you're conflating issues that have emerged in the past, in the recent past, in terms of relationships with farming organisations and returns in the market, with a much more serious situation of the presence of COVID, both in our environment, in our communities, and unfortunately also in meat plants. The issue around farmers' incomes, the issue about trading prices, and by the way, I would agree with some of the points you make about the returns that come to the sector. I would believe they should be stronger, both for processors and farmers. But we are in a process, and we have been in a deep process since last September through the Meat Market Task Force in dealing with a range of issues that were identified as needing attention, including wider levels of transparency. And we are through that process now. We've had about 5 meetings of the Meat Market Task Force, including one 2 weeks ago. And we're moving through that process very well. And I would also point out that, and I said it earlier, we had a very difficult market situation at the beginning of this crisis. We're nowhere near the end of that, because we don't have the markets available to us currently that we would ordinarily had were it not for the case of having COVID. So we're in a very difficult situation, and yet we're performing extremely well at the European average in terms of prices. So I think I can leave that aside because it's being dealt with in another forum. As
parallel that I was drawing
about large-scale plants.
People
we do not have large-scale.
But the question was specifically,
we have 40 plants.
There should be responsibility taken
for a small population of animals overall. So we're not large industrial-scale plants as you would like to describe them.
Are you going to answer the question? Will I ask them again?
I'm sorry, I thought I was picking up on the point you raised. I'm willing to finish out on the rest of them if you wish.
Well, just back to those ones quickly. I'm wondering what responsibility should owners of Ireland's meat processing plants take for the outbreaks, as well as wondering, would you support us seeking a task force to examine the terms and conditions for workers in the sector?
Yeah, I did respond to the other 2 points you made, so I will respond to those now. We don't see what we've had in terms of the COVID outbreak is we have had a task force, the National Outbreak Control Committee, the people who are the experts, virologists, epidemiologists, people who understand how clusters form and how you can mitigate those. And we have engaged thoroughly with not directly with the NOCT, because we haven't been, but at every single factory site where we've had significant clusters, management have been deep in discussion and cooperation with the NOCT. And we think that that's what needs to be done. It's the right direction, and we're happy with that. So as far as the task force is concerned, I don't see the merit in that, but if that emerges from your deliberations, then we will look at that very closely. As far as responsibility for outbreaks are concerned, we, as I've tried to indicate on a number of occasions, and we put it clearly in our submission and in my opening statement, that we made it very clear from the beginning, right from the beginning, in fact, a number of weeks before the lockdown commenced, and before the first case had taken place, the first case in Ireland of a positive COVID case, we had developed a set of protocols that applied in every single establishment. There has been no perfect solution in any environment to preventing the spread of Covid-19. This came at us out of the blue, as it came at the rest of our community out of the blue. We would not, as a sector, have had the expertise to deal with that. But I think, given the fact that when the HSE produced their set of protocols on the 15th of May 2020, 2 months before that, we had a substantial set of protocols already in place, and they were not expanded to any great degree on the 15th of May. So in other words, that was suggesting that the things that we had done were the proper measures that we had put in place.
You spoke briefly on the meat industry's position on unannounced inspections, but you spoke more with regard to the HSA's response. I suppose the sector that's under greater scrutiny, and given the recommendation from the director of the Migrant Rights Centre, Adele McGinley, who was in here earlier today, I would hope you'd welcome any measures that could increase transparency and address public concerns. So I'm wondering, do you support unannounced labour and health and safety inspections by state authorities, not just veterinary? And if the inspectors can't have immediate access to the factory, then do you think there should be a penalty?
Yeah, I can respond to that, Deputy. I mean, we've said already in relation to HSA inspections, and said it publicly also, that we don't have an issue with unannounced inspections. Right. They were determined to be announced at this point in time. And I don't, I think we can't get away from perhaps some of what has been said as if there's been no control, no oversight, no verification. I mean, I do think it's important, and we shouldn't ignore the fact that right from the beginning of this process, we have been engaged with Department of Agriculture, inspectors and veterinary authorities, both at national and local level, and they have also verified the type of measures that have been in place. It's not, I mean, and we shouldn't, leave here that there hasn't been ongoing verification. And we can focus on the HSA and whether it's announced or unannounced, as I said. I
just needed, clarification that you would welcome those unannounced inspections. Thank you. That's perfect. Just because I'm constrained, so I'll just move on. Workers have consistently told journalists that they're frightened to talk about conditions in the sector. They've kept anonymity in media reports for fear of retribution. I'm wondering what you think this says about the industry, and do you support them speaking out about it? I suppose, do you accept the testimony of workers that told various media outlets that some meat plants did not fully implement the HSE guidelines from the start of the Covid-19 crisis when they were alerted to it? Workers alleged that even after they asked managers for PPE, they were not given protection. Do you accept those statements?
Well, I mean, do you accept the statements of the agencies and the authorities that have inspected and found that measures are in place? Because, I mean, while I don't know the individuals or the plans they speak to, what I do know is that on a number of occasions, I think both the National Outbreak Control Team, the HSE, where it has been involved with plants at local level, expressed satisfaction and agreement with the level of cooperation and the measures that were in place in plants.
Yeah, I accept that a lot of the measures are in place now. I suppose my question was in relation to
I think
in the crisis.
that's what I accept too, Deputy, that
In all meat factories you represent, these measures are in place now and being adhered to. And to clarify how the PPE is being issued to workers and paid for, and how regularly they're being issued with fresh PPE would also be good to know.
I think PPE, and depending on the PPE, visors versus masks. Masks have to be, I think, replaced on daily or shift-wise basis. Visors, which are more, different type of PPE, are not as frequent. But those necessary protective equipment is being provided, has been provided for some time by the industry to the staff, and will continue to be so. As I said, in relation to the overall suite of measures that are in place in the industry now, they must be maintained. There can't be any room, there can't be any stepping back from that, and I don't have a fear that there will be any stepping back from that.
Is the PPE being paid for by the individual meat plants?
As I understand it, absolutely, Deputy, yes. I mean, I think it's important also, it's not just PPE, there's a huge amount of investment has gone into the measures. As many parts of life have had to do, and many employers, many businesses have had to do, and unfortunately will have to continue to do until we come to the end of this pandemic, hopefully. But there has been investment right across a huge number of areas in changing canteens, changing layouts, bringing in additional canteen capacity, temperature checking equipment, a wide range of that nature have all been invested in and will continue to be invested in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Kearns.